Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Behind Andrew's back, the iron doors opened. The sound made him involuntarily shudder and turn around. For a second, the man froze, looking at the closed gate. Then he turned back in confusion. That was it. Freedom. Freedom. In 5 years in the zone, he'd forgotten what it was like out here. But now he had to start all over again. The man took a deep breath of fresh air. Even the air here was different, tasty. Andrew threw his backpack over his shoulder and slowly walked to the bus stop, which loomed about 100 meters away from the prison fence. The old bus didn't take long to come to a stop, and as if reluctantly, it opened its door. Andrew was the only passenger in the cabin. The conductor was discussing something vividly with the driver and paid no attention to him. Andrew looked at her questioningly. He took out a special bill from his pocket and waited patiently. Finally, the lush lady deigned to pay attention to him, casting a glance at the large man in a cheap jacket. Flipping from side to side approached the abundance of whose name for some reason with a challenge, she said. Andrew held out the money to her. The conductor contemptuously pressed her lips and with 2 fingers took the bill, as if dirty it was poured in the bowels of her purse on the immense waist and shoved in Andrew's hand some pennies, together with the ticket. Andrew machine counted the change. There was a sign in the salon, fare $0.08. The conductor gave him $0.02 in change. Andrew grinned and shook his head at being fooled, and in a brazen way. But he did not contact the owner of the bus salon, and he wouldn't get poorer. Andrew even repeated the last words to himself, not more offended, and then again smiled sadly at his thoughts. Yes, he couldn't be poorer than these already. There is nothing. Andrew leaned against the glass and thought, remembering the past. 5 years ago, he had everything serious in business and a beautiful wife. He met Maria at a college party. Andrew was graduating from Architecture University and Maria from law school. Both young, handsome. Of course, their social status was different. Andrew, from a simple family, came to the city from faraway backwoods, was able to enroll on his own. He studied successfully, and his mother lived in the village. His father died when Andrew was studying. The guy doubted for a long time whether he needed this institute. No, it was his dream to study to be an architect. How could he leave his mother? Especially if she had a heart condition. But Kelly insisted. Study, son, she'd say, as she escorted Andrew to the big city. And he did, one of the brightest students in the class. Andrew lived in a dormitory and worked part-time writing term papers in the evenings. But Maria didn't know any need in anything since childhood. Her father had a solid construction business. Mom, for fun, engaged in a network of beauty salons. Maria received this education simply because it is not comical. Such a rich girl to be without a diploma. And her father was already asleep and saw how his daughter would fit into his business. But Maria was indifferent. Why should she work? Her husband would provide for her. Maria's parents didn't accept Andrew at once, though with a good profession, but still a starving man. And then Father David looked at the future son-in-law that something calculated and realized that the best right hand in business he will not find. Andrew and his brains wouldn't let him down. Betty's mom was used to agreeing with her husband. If that's what he decided, then so be it. In short, Maria's choice was approved. And after graduation, Andrew joined their family. Andrew did not care about the status of their family. He just loved his Maria sincerely and seriously. Even if she had no dowry, he would still follow her to the ends of the earth. And Maria looked at Andrew with loving eyes. For her, he was the best. Soon after the wedding, David hired Andrew and never regretted it. Andrew was a savvy specialist, and then David had to retire with a heart condition. Trouble happened, and his son-in-law took over the family business. Maria also worked with him, but for her it was only a means of relief from boredom. Andrew already had his own house, car, bank account. He dreamed of only one thing, that their mansion with Maria sounded children's laughter. But his wife was in no hurry to become a mom to herself. She wanted to live. Andrew waited patiently for the mom, whom Andrew had moved to the city from the countryside. She did not ask her son about anything, but sometimes hinted that it was time for her to become a grandmother, or she might not wait for him. Everything will still be. Andrew only smiled. That evening they were coming back from Maria with friends. Andrew had been drinking, so his wife sat behind the wheel. They drove in silence. It was already getting dark on the nettlesome rain. Andrew loosened up a bit, and he was dozing in the passenger seat. Suddenly, there was a sharp bump, a jolt, a scream from Andrew's wife. "I hit him." He heard his wife's hysterical voice and instantly sobered up. "Who?" Andrew looked frantically out the rear window of the car. "Yes, stop the car." "And I'm afraid," screamed the wife, and also increased the speed. And only his new husband's shout brought her to her senses, and she obediently pulled over to the side of the road. Andrew jumped out of the car and ran back down the road. About 500 meters away, an elderly man was lying on the road. And how could he appear on a deserted road in the forest? After all, the nearest settlement is 2 kilometers away. Andrew saw the basket, which flew off to the side of the road. Mushrooms are everywhere. Clearly, it's a mushroom hunter. Andrew rushed over to check for a pulse and froze in horror. The man was dead. "Andrew, Andrew." Andrew heard his wife's voice from the darkness. "Tell me, is it a dog or some other animal?" Maria came closer and cried out in horror. "Maria, it's not a dog," Andrew said quietly. "You hit a man. We'll have to call the police for an ambulance." Maria remembered and went for the phone. He didn't need her anymore. Maria cried out again, then shook herself and cried. Andrew ran up to her muttering, "Don't worry, that's what he said. The police would sort it all out. After all, it was his own fault. Why did he jump out from under the tires?" "He jumped out." Maria nodded uncertainly. "He's got no color, no reflective elements. You just didn't see him. I think a lawyer will prove in no time that you couldn't have avoided the collision." "Andrew, I'm going to jail," Maria whispered. Andrew saw in the darkness a face white with fear. "What are you, silly?" "Of course not," Andrew said not so confidently. "I'll definitely go to jail." Maria screamed. "Andrew, I can't go to jail. I can't. I'm pregnant." Andrew, hearing her words, even opened his mouth in surprise and then pressed her even tighter to him. My darling, but why didn't you say anything?" "I just found out today. I wanted to tell you in a romantic setting," sobs. "Maria, is that how it is?" "Andrew, I'm afraid there'll be proceedings, all sorts of questions. I'm a lawyer myself. I understand. I'll go to jail. I'm afraid for our child. I could lose him because of all this worry." "Maria, don't worry. Everything will be fine," Andrew said firmly and shook his wife by the shoulders. "Do you hear me? Then remember, I was driving." Maria quietly ached at what she heard, and then grabbed him tightly by the neck. "Good. Thank you. Yeah, I got it. Andrew, Daddy will hire the best lawyer too." Andrew called the police himself. Then the proceedings began. The police found out that the car hadn't braked in blood on impact. They found a decent amount of booze on Andrew, and the lawyer hired by David was a bit lax in Andrew's defense. In the end, he got 5 years in a minimum security penal colony. When the sentences were read out in the courtroom, Andrew looked at his mom, who had aged a lifetime. Kelly looked at him too, without taking her eyes off him. Tears kept running down her face. Maria, on the other hand, was not in court. The lawyer provided a certificate that Maria was in the hospital with the threat of miscarriage. David was at the trial and sat in the doghouse in the head. And when Andrew was being led away, the mother suddenly shrieked and rushed to her son. But the bailiffs wouldn't let her nearby. Andrew saw the mother collapsed and began to settle on the floor. He rushed to her, but he was twisted and taken out of the hall. "Call an ambulance," Andrew shouted. "She has a heart condition. Call an ambulance rudely," replied the bailiff, and worried like a mother. You should have thought before, when he got behind the wheel drunk. They put him in a car and took him away. And already in the zone, he found out that Mom died of a heart attack. Andrew sobbed from helplessness. He couldn't even say goodbye to his mother. And it was all his own fault. Yes, he was the one who gave her the heart attack. Maria wrote to him at first, even came once for a date, was quiet and thoughtful. Maria told me the lawyer didn't appeal. Why? Andrew asked. David promised to pull me out. I don't know. I'll ask, said the wife absent-mindedly. And then she looked at him angrily. So you sit here and only think about yourself, and how I feel you do not care. I do care, Andrew exclaimed. Maria, I only think about you and also about my mom. I didn't save her. You didn't save our child. The wife replied sharply. So you mean? Andrew turned pale and hesitated half a word. Exactly. I lost the baby because of you. Maria lowered her eyes. She paused, then dropped her head. It's all your fault. Maria whispered to Andrew. Why do you say that? It's hard for me to hear you say that. You know how it was. Why would you do that? Don't worry, we'll have children. Maria didn't say anything, just shook her head and called the guard. He was surprised that the date was already over. There was still plenty of time. But Maria headed for the exit. She left without even hugging her husband, and Andrew sat on a stool, realizing what had happened. That is, Maria had convinced herself that it was his fault, and Andrew realized that there was no way to prove otherwise, and he didn't want to. I guess that's how Maria got tougher after losing the baby. But time would pass, and she would realize how wrong she was. But a month later, Andrew received a notice that Maria had divorced him. Such a betrayal made him sick to his stomach. The first thing he wanted to say was that he had incriminated himself. Let Maria answer for her deed. But then experienced people in the zone explained to him that all this is nothing. The sentence has already come into legal force. It is unlikely that anyone will want to deal with it again. Especially given that Maria's father is not the last man in town. He will do everything to shield his daughter from the charges. And he'll add time to Andrew's sentence. So much for the minimum. And Andrew accepted it. In those 5 years, not another line from Maria, not another broadcast. David also forgot about his faithful assistant. Colleagues and former classmates seemed to disappear. Andrew was left alone with his misfortune. He had no one else in the world. And even where his mother was buried, he did not know. Andrew's soul froze like a stone, and he accepted the ordeal he was given. Yeah, there were things in the zone, but Andrew coped. He survived. His freedom. The bus shook. Andrew woke up from his memories, looked around. This is his stop. Now he had to get to the railroad station, and then he could take a train to NY. He stopped at the door and tried to ask the conductor driver how to get to the station, but they pretended to be discussing some topic. Andrew only shook his head. Yes, those two put a cross on him, saying he was a criminal. To hell with them. We don't know what other trials fate will send them. An old woman at the bus stop was selling pies, so Andrew asked her about the station. You turn behind the store, and there's the station, said the old lady friendly and smiled. Honey, do you want a pie? I do, Andrew admitted. What do you have them with? These with cabbage and these with meat. The old lady offered willingly. Take both. Oh, they turned out delicious today. Andrew bought a couple of them and walked towards the station, chewing on a pie as he went. Grandma was right, but tastier too. And pies. Or did he think so? After prison rations. On the train. Andrew kept thinking that's why he was going to NY. On the other hand, where else would he go? He had friends and colleagues there, albeit former ones. Andrew was offended by them for 5 years. No one had ever sent him a message. But now it's not a matter of emotions. It's necessary to decide how to go on living, especially since he has his own place. No, not the mansion where he and Maria lived. David convinced him to put it in his wife's name when they bought it. Andrew did. He trusted Maria like he trusted himself. But there was an apartment Andrew bought for his mom. It was probably empty. He would settle down, have a rest, and then look for a job. He doesn't have much money. How much money can you make in a prison shop? And his accounts were empty. At that time, all the funds were seized in court and then transferred to the relatives of the dead old man. Also, you have to meet Maria and just look her in the eye. In NY, Andrew was a little confused. For 5 years, he had gotten used to such hustle and bustle. He sat in the square by the bus stop. He gathered his courage and drove to his mother's apartment. There was a brand new intercom on the door. The magnetic key didn't work for some reason. Andrew waited until one of the tenants jumped out of the entrance and came in. Here was the right apartment on the 4th floor. Andrew sighed with relief. Now he will finally rest. Take a breath. You're the experts. But something went wrong here too. The keys to the apartment didn't fit either. But Andrew persisted in pushing it. Suddenly, the door opened and a bald man stared at Andrew with a scowl behind his back. "What do you want, man?" he asked in surprise and instinctively clenched his fists. "Who are you?" In turn, surprised Andrew, a little stepped aside and grinned the man, finally waking up. "I am the master. And you, boy, and get out of here before I call the police. You got the wrong tip. This place isn't vacant. This is my apartment," Andrew exclaimed. "I bought it for my mother 7 years ago. I don't know what was here 7 years ago, but it's been here for 3 years." "What do you mean it's my place?" replied the stranger. "And I bought it legally. All the papers are in order. Can I see them?" "Yeah, sure. Get out here, or I'll be sure to call the police and get you back where you came from." The man gave Andrew a scornful look and slammed the door shut. Andrew rushed to the bell again, but stopped at the last moment. The man was right. The police will come and arrest him for hooliganism, or even for attempted theft. He's got no credibility right now. He's just a convict to everyone. Andrew walked down the stairs, stood at the entrance, thought, and went to the housing office. There they would know everything about the faces. Luckily for him, there was a friend of his mother's. Aunt Wendy must have worked here all her life with Kelly. They'd become friends. Even the officials sometimes in the kitchen, when Aunt Wendy saw Andrew, she'd splash her hands. "Oh, and Andrew's back," and she gasped. Back Aunt Wendy nodded glumly at Andrew. "I wanted to go to my mother's apartment, but the owners changed. I don't understand how it's possible. The apartment was registered to me." Aunt Wendy was confused. "Oh, I don't know how it happened then. It's just that Maria sold your apartment and this guy moved in. Some criminal." Wendy shut up and blushed, realizing that she had said too much. Andrew only grinned sadly. "Aunt Wendy, it's all right. I'm a felon now too. I can't help it." "Andrew," Wendy said tearfully, "how did this happen?" "Oh, that's too bad. Your mom didn't believe you were going to jail until the last minute. She didn't believe you were driving. You were such a careful driver. Yeah, it all came out. Aunt Wendy, do you know where Mom was buried?" "Of course I do." "I know. I walked her from the morgue myself. They took her to your village. I think Maria told someone in the village that the village council sent a car. Oh, Kelly, I feel so sorry for her." She held back the running tears. Andrew sank. Memories of Mother hurt her heart. So Mom was taken to her homeland. She was probably buried next to her father. And that made him feel better, even though his own people are lying together. But Maria, she didn't even want to do her mom's funeral. Andrew couldn't believe his ex-wife was like that. She swore her love, begged him to save her. It would have changed the country. It was worth it for Andrew to take the blame. Andrew realized he couldn't avoid talking to Maria, where to find out about the apartment, and just look her in the eye. "Well, Aunt Wendy, I'll go tiredly," he said and turned to the door. "Oh, where are you going?" "Come to your senses, Wendy. Let's at least get you some tea. I still got roots. Come on, I'll tell you about selling the apartment. Everything I know. Andrew's stomach sounded, by the way, but he still had a negative headache. Oh, Aunt Wendy didn't want to hear anything. Tugged on his sleeve. Some crust sat him down at a small table, kettles boiling. And then, munching on the pie, Andrew listened to Aunt Wendy's story. After Kelly's death, the apartment had stood empty for some time. Then suddenly there was a rush of people coming and going around her. Several times Wendy saw Maria with an older man. It sounded like David. And then the bald man came to the housing office and said he was the owner of the apartment. His papers were in order. But I still think you should go to the police, Wendy said at the end of her story. Let them find out how your apartment was not yours. Although your father-in-law is a very powerful man. Oh, it will be hard to prove the truth. Andrew only nodded silently in response, realizing that the woman is right for everyone. He is just a convict without the right to vote. Where are you staying? Come to your senses, Wendy. Nowhere. Andrew confessed. Thought I was at my mother's apartment. Oh, trouble, sighed Wendy and thought to herself, listen, I can let you stay in the basement for a few days. We have a janitor's room down there. There's a room, but no janitor. You can stay and think about how to live your life, or I'll hire you as a janitor. Thanks, Aunt Wendy. I'd like to live. I don't really want to be a janitor, though. Honestly, I know it's kind of wrong with a college degree, but Andrew, no offense. It's going to be hard for you to find a job in your profession right now. I'll try, he smiled sadly. And if I can give you a final answer a little later. Wendy agreed, gave him the keys to the den, walked him to the place. All there showed the room is small, without a window, darkly stuffy, but there's a couch and a pillow. Andrew fell on his couch and slept for almost 24 hours. He woke up not realizing what time it was. He looked at the clock, 6:30 in the morning, twirled the watch in his hands. It was probably the only valuable thing he had left. It had been Maria's birthday present to him. The pain of betrayal stabbed at his heart. Andrew forcefully clutched the watch in his hands, swung, intending to smash it against the wall. But then I froze. Okay, emotions out. I got to use my head. The watch is worth money, but how much he's got left in his pocket? No more than $200. The change they gave him in the zone. Andrew washed his face over the basin and shook out his clothes. That was all the preparations before going out. Andrew grinned sadly. He used to be the one dressed to the hilt, but now he was almost a bum. Not almost, but a bum. Once again, he remembered the apartment. He said to himself, I have to go to the police anyway. He said to himself. He had to check in with the district police officer. Andrew decided to ask him about the apartment, where to start the proceedings. Maria had deceived him and had to answer for it. At the police station, the elderly policeman gave a short lecture about behavior on the outside. Make a mark in his logbook, but all go and do not break the law again, he said and handed Andrew a passport. Don't you want to ask where I'm going to live? Where do you have a residence registration in your passport? The policeman was surprised. A completely different person lives at this address, and the apartment now belongs to him. Andrew briefly explained the situation. The policeman listened, clarified who his former father-in-law was, and left the office for a few minutes, leaving the man alone. Soon he returned, sat down at the table and sighed heavily. Here's the deal. In general, you know who David is, and without me, said the district police officer, trying not to look Andrew in the eyes. Of course, I'll check all the information, but I can already say that you can't get your apartment back. So don't even try. Is this where you live now? In the basement, in the janitor's room. What's not a place to live? The precinct officer cheered up. So live there. And the work of a janitor is quite honorable, just prestigious. Sadly, grinned Andrew. Okay, I've got it all figured out. He stood up, said goodbye, and headed for the door. You're not violating there. The policeman shouted after him. You'll be back in no time. Andrew closed the door behind him without answering. He walked out of the ward and sighed heavily. There was no help for him here. In fact, that's what he'd originally thought. But there had been a little hope. Now there was only disappointment. He sat down in the public garden, deciding what to do next. What would he do as a janitor? But first still to meet Maria and her father, the ones he used to consider his family. Andrew reached his former mansion and rang the bell. It seemed like nothing had changed here in all these years. The same fence he'd ordered himself. The same mailbox. The gate felt open, and a guy in a security guard's uniform peeked out. "Who's there roughly?" he asked, his gaze fixed on Andrew's figure. "I'd like Mistress Maria." "Listen, husband, get out of here, or I'll call the police. I bought this house personally." Andrew was outraged. "Call those who live here now. And what other demands?" The guard grinned. "I have a problem with my head, so I'll quickly call whoever I need." The guard slammed the door. Andrew stood at the gate in fury, clenching his fists. How could this be? He had been thrown out of his past life and completely forgotten, used and thrown out. Just then he heard the sound of an engine. A signal car stopped in front of the house. The gate opened and it began to drive into the yard. Andrew saw Maria behind the wheel, and she saw him too. Changed in the face, turned pale, turned away from the car, drove into the yard. The gate closed. Andrew didn't rush to the car. He just stood at the gate and waited, not knowing what. And then the gate opened. Maria came out into the street. "Hi," she just said. "Hi," Andrew answered her. "I didn't expect to see you. To be honest, I knew that when you were released, Maria communicated simply as if a former acquaintance met, but she tried not to make eye contact." "Released," Andrew quietly answered her. "Maria, I want you to explain everything to me. Why you did this to me. I saved you. You got divorced. Your father pretended I didn't exist, like I didn't help him take his business to the next level. You leaked me. They wouldn't let me in the mansion I was buying. And the condo. What right did you have to sell it? How many questions?" Maria smirked. "You know what, buddy? What happened a long time ago is in the past and doesn't matter. You have your life. I have mine. I divorced you. What did you want to be with a criminal's wife? I'm not supposed to be a criminal's wife. Dad has a decent business, serious partners, and here's a criminal. Have you forgotten who I did time for?" Quietly and angrily asked Andrew, for whom Maria slammed his eyes. "For myself, and was doing time." You, Andrew, wanted to swear. I could hardly restrain myself. Emotions so and it overwhelmed him. "Maria, I can't believe you're like this. You were different. You loved me. You were expecting a child from me." Maria laughed. "God, you're so naive, so gullible. There was no child. There was no baby. And that's how I was wrong." Maria grinned at him. Andrew's temples felt like they'd been hit with a hammer. She had been deceiving him from the beginning. If Andrew hadn't thought Maria was pregnant, would he have taken her offense? Probably not. He would have done anything to get her released, but he wouldn't have taken such a sin upon himself. Maria sees that Andrew is outwardly calm, completely naked, and said something and said, laughing. From her story, Andrew realized that his father-in-law was not trying to get him out of jail. That's why he hired a less than perfect lawyer. That's it. Why didn't he need a man in his company and family? For the stain on his reputation. It's embarrassing for the partners. After Andrew was locked up, he went back to running the firm. But now he can rest. The business is in good hands. "Did you find a new fool?" Andrew asked. "This man is the best. Look, aren't you afraid to tell me these things? I'm from prison." Andrew just looked Maria in the eye. "I'm going to take you right back." You grinned. Maria wouldn't have the guts. Besides, we're being watched. And if anything, they'll come to my rescue. She nodded her head toward the CCTV camera mounted on the gate. Andrew only shook his head. How hurt and disgusted he was to see the one he had once loved betray him. You didn't think I would go to the police and report you? He asked. Say that it was you who ran over a man, that you took away my apartment. I'm not afraid. With her head thrown back, Maria replied, Who are you and who are we? The apartment is yours, but it was bought with my father's money. Yes, it's his business, and he was just letting you earn money. Why was that apartment sitting around doing nothing? So I sold it and took a nice vacation with the money. Everything you earned is mine. Don't you try to resent me. My dad will beat the shit out of you, but he doesn't last forever. And as I recall, he had heart problems. You can't wait. Dad was treated at the best hospitals in Europe, and now he's perfectly healthy. Okay, well, you tell me. I don't want to understand a bit. I'm not ashamed of what you did to me. My mom told me you didn't even do the funeral. Why would I do that? It was your mother. You should be thankful your dad found the contacts of your neighbors. They took care of the funeral. Otherwise, they'd have buried your mother like a bum. Blood came to Andrew's head. He stepped towards Maria with his fists clenched. A little more, and he wouldn't have been able to hold back. But then the gate fell off and a man looked out of the yard. Andrew was startled to see him. It was William, his former deputy. Formerly gray, unassuming. Now he looked like a groomed cat in an expensive suit, with a neat haircut and an expensive ring on his finger. Maria, can I help you? He turned to the woman. She turned around and took a quick step. She came up to him and gave him a hug. No, dear, he was just leaving. So you're the one who took my place? Andrew grinned. No, I'm just in my place now. Cold, William answered him. Andrew, you'd better get out of here. Yes, indeed. I have nothing more to do here, Andrew replied, trying to appear as indifferent as possible. You, Maria, will regret what you have done. You'll see the boomerang effect will work. Are you threatening me? Maria raised her eyebrows at William. Mind you, I really could call the police without bothering. I'm out here. Tip yes, love. Andrew grinned crookedly and walked away. He heard the wicket slam shut. The wicket gate went silent, and he walked on and on. There were no thoughts in his head. Emptiness. No, everything had burned out long ago, back when he'd found out about the divorce. But Andrew hadn't even realized how deceitful his ex-wife was. Now he did, and he saw it, and he was horrified. And she was the reason he'd ruined his life. Andrew wandered around the city for a long time with no thoughts, no goals, just walking on his own, not knowing where he was going. And then he felt a slight twinge. Too remembered that he hadn't had a crumb in his mouth since morning. Recalculated his money was not thick. Andrew remembered the watch that was in his pocket. It could be sold to a pawn shop. Andrew took it out, and suddenly his hand shuddered, as if Maria had given it to him from a burn. He looked for an urn by the small cafeteria on the corner stands. Andrew headed that way. Without regret, he threw the watch away. The smells coming from the cafe, and model Andrew decided to still stop in for a scone and tea. He could definitely splurge. He opened the door and came face to face with a lean, gray-haired man. Andrew, he exclaimed. Peter, Andrew asked uncertainly. I recognize you, though it's been years since you left our village. What a meeting. The men were the first to extend their hands. Andrew readily extended his own. Peter, his former math teacher who worked in a rural school. He was in NY to attend a teacher's forum. As one of the experienced teachers, he was delegated to NY. And now he was hurrying to the train station to have a snack in a cafe and did not expect that he would meet his former student, though he was very glad to see him. Andrew Peter knew him only from a good side, and his parents too. The teacher also knew about his criminal record, but that didn't bother him at all. Did you want a simple snack? Asked Peter, after the usual words of greeting. Come on, let's go. I'll have some more coffee. Andrew bought the cheapest scone. Tea while he ate. Peter drank coffee, south, looking at Andrew or out the window. Both were silent. Well, tell me, Finally, the old teacher spoke. "There's not much to tell." Andrew shrugged his shoulders. "I was dumped. I don't want to talk about it, Peter." I tactfully answered the teacher. "If you want to add your answer later, I will listen. Now I will not interfere with further questions, although I realize that you were dealt with meanly. I can tell from the way your mom was treated after she died. She was in the morgue for 2 weeks while the village collected money and organized a car. It took a while to get there. Did you do it?" Andrew's voice trembled. "Not only me. The whole village helped. The chairman of the village council was a good man, young but understanding. The man went to the meeting. Don't worry. Now your parents are in the cemetery together, and they're in heaven. But Andrew, life goes on. What do you think you're going to do next?" "I don't know," Andrew admitted bitterly and grinned. "I've been offered to work as a janitor. I think I'll take it, as long as there's a place to live. Housing is good," Peter nodded. "But I think you need to switch gears. I can see the hurt and resentment in your eyes. I don't think you're going to make a mess of things. Forgive your abusers. Time will punish them." Andrew looked at the teacher in surprise. That's how Peter could guess what he was afraid to admit to himself. After all, resentment really began to brew in his soul. And if at once, having left Maria, he wanted to forget her, then, as if someone began to whisper to him, to take revenge. Let her retaliate. It was like the devil was at his back. "Have you thought about going home to the village?" I brought him back to reality. Teacher's question, "What will I do there?" Andrew shrugged. "I'll try here." "Well, suit yourself," nodded Peter in response. "You'll come back. No one will chase you away. But there's one problem. Your parents' house burned down. Lightning struck it in the spring 2 years ago. Where am I supposed to go?" Andrew smiled sadly. "At least there's a place to sleep here. It's easier at home." Peter shook his head. "Think about it. Everyone knows you there since you were a kid." "That's exactly what they know," Andrew sighed. "And my whole history, too. Don't be too quick to take offense at people. Sometimes they are wiser than they seem." They talked some more and said goodbye warmly. Peter hurried to the train and went to the very cellar that had suddenly become his home. And there Wendy was already waiting for him. She saw him and almost noticed him. She rushed towards Andrew with a guilty look. She looked at him and told him that today the bosses were there and demanded that she arrange for a new person to take the janitor's place. "So I agree. Aunt Wendy, I'll work for you at least a corner. What will it be?" "Oh, Andrew," Aunt Wendy sighed too late. "He's already been registered. You didn't leave me any documents, and the one with a passport and a permit." "I see," Andrew chuckled. "Even to get a job as a janitor, you need a lot of goodwill." "What goodwill is there?" Aunt Wendy waved her hand. "It's just that the bosses are always looking for ways to save money. So they found some guest worker. They can pay him less. Oh, and one more thing. Andrew, I started talking about you, but the chief, as soon as he heard something and sat down, he wouldn't listen to anything. I'm sorry about that. Come on, why are you apologizing?" Andrew tried to smile. "I didn't tell you exactly. Do I agree to work for you or not? It's okay, I'll find something else. At least you can take my backpack, and it's already in my office." After sitting at Wendy's for a while, Andrew left. Wherefore? He did not know after the zone, and after all the events that had happened to him, there was a kind of desolation. He himself did not realize how many people led him to the office where he worked. Andrew sat nearby on a bench and watched people going in and out of the office, bustling, socializing. Did Andrew want to see any of his former subordinate colleagues? No. After all, in these 5 years, everyone had shown their true faces. No one ever mentioned him. So he's not needed. Andrew saw a car drive up to the office. David, Maria, and William got out. They chatted cheerfully and headed into the building. What was going through Andrew's mind? I wanted to rush to them, to knock them down, to trample them. But then he remembered Peter's words, "I'm sorry, time will punish them." Andrew sat down on the bench again, thinking, and what did he actually want? It was expected from Test that he would not be happy for his son-in-law. Maria's business was the most important thing to him. Andrew probably just loved her too much and did not notice what she really is. And William, what's the use of him? There's no telling what will happen to him. Andrew stood up heavily and walked away from the office. He walked further along the city, realizing that he was a stranger here. Nobody needed him. And Peter was right. He should go home to his small homeland in the village. And at the train station, Andrew's hands dropped when he heard the cost of a ticket to his station, if in general. Shyly he asked the young cashier, "The train is a long-distance train. It has no common carriages." Scornfully puckering her lips, the girl replied, "We will buy." "Not yet," muttered Andrew, took his passport, and under the judgmental glances of other passengers standing in line, walked away from the station. The ticket cost almost $50, and he didn't even have $20. That's what he had to do. He felt like he was going to cry from despair. Andrew sat on a bench at the station and berated himself. Why didn't he ask Peter the price of the ticket? Maybe the old man would have been busy making himself up as if he was going or not going. Peter had been on the train for a long time. Why didn't you ask Aunt Wendy for a loan? She would have paid him back later. But you never know if Aunt Wendy would have borrowed. They didn't know each other that well. Andrew thought and could not find a solution. He was thirsty. Nearby trade was boiling. The smell of something fried and delicious was unbearable. Andrew sighed and headed for a stall with hot dogs. Immediately, he ran into a man who was talking loudly on the phone with someone. "Mike, what the hell?" The man yelled into the phone. "I got a delivery. I got to unload it. Where are you? How could you not come out? You're so rude. I'll kick you the hell out. Come here now. How are you doing out of town? What am I supposed to do?" And then there was a lot of swearing. Andrew immediately realized this was his chance. "Excuse me." He caught up with the man when he had already disconnected the phone and was quickly heading to one of the shopping pavilions. "I overheard you need a loader. I can do that." You man evaluating, looked at Andrew, grinned, shrugged his shoulders. "Did you recently reclined, or what reclined?" Andrew confessed honestly. "But I don't want to go back there. I'd like to earn money for a ticket to my homeland." "How much do you need?" $35 is not enough." "Well, I won't give you that much. There's no more work than a cash register." "All right, let's go do something. My name's Kevin." "Yours, Andrew." "Now, Andrew, I've got fruit and vegetables to unload. I've got a store nearby. You'll be on your way in a couple hours." "Agreed, agreed," nodded Andrew. The small shop was not far from the station. Kevin walked the whole way, swearing. From his remarks, Andrew realized that the merchant's money was bad. The car broke down. The saleswoman was sick, and then the loader hadn't shown up for work, and the goods were already waiting under the door. And you should be sympathetic. Andrew was genuinely happy he had a chance to earn money. And there, you may see what other part-time jobs he can get. So he collects for the ticket. Andrew coped with the task quickly. Kevin only silently watched his work. And when Andrew put the last box neatly, he suddenly handed him $40 or. "We already agreed on $10. Andrew was confused. "I consider it charity," Kevin grinned. "I know what it's like to be without support after the zone. I went through it myself, but it was a long time ago. Some kind people helped me then. And now I'm repaying the debt. Take it, and don't doubt it." They saw it through. They drank it. I don't drink. That's how I see it. A non-drinker is just a black streak. You got a boyfriend. But it's not an abrupt say, either. It'll get better. Andrew said thank you. They shook hands and said goodbye. And a few hours later, Andrew was already sitting in a parlor car, looking out the window and thinking, soon I'll be home. No one was waiting for him there either. But the thought that he was going to his homeland gave him strength. And Andrew was smiling. It turns out they're only a little bit from Peter. The teacher will come home in the evening, Andrew in the morning. But before that, almost 2 days on the road. The time on the train flew by quickly. Andrew mostly slept or just lay with his back turned to the wall. Only matchmaking when the conductors touched him on the shoulder. "In 15 minutes your station," she said, as already Andrew jumped up sharply, almost hitting the top shelf. "Don't hurry. You will have time." The girl smiled and went further along the car. And now Andrew stood on the platform of a small train station. His heart clenched longingly. He remembered how many years ago he had left this station for the big city, for a new life, which he thought would be happy. And now he had returned penniless and branded a convict. The buses would leave for the route only in a couple of hours. Andrew decided not to wait, but to walk to his native village. It's only 10 kilometers away. He walked along the deserted road and put all the details. The old meat packing plant at the entrance to the district village is still standing, only dilapidated. They must have closed it down by now. Only the walls are left. And then they made a new dump with a fence around it. Oh, how much garbage is there, and why isn't it recycled? Why are they piling it all up? In the distance we can see the pine forest. Andrew even stopped, realizing that something is wrong with the forest. It's disappearing. A lot of trees are standing dry. Andrew sighed heavily, remembering how as a boy he used to run here with other boys to collect ideas. It was breathtaking. The trees were buzzing with their own, and among them grew up little neighbor kids, collected cones, and arranged fights. It was fun. And now Borda was dying. What happened to him? Andrew walked further along the road, remembering the past. The sun had already finally spread his shoulders and smiled happily at the sky. Forest bird blew a warm breeze. For the first time in a long time, Andrew suddenly felt lightness on his soul, and there was confidence that everything would be fine now. Soon the first roofs of houses appeared around the corner. His native village. Andrew added a step, and at the village itself suddenly stopped. Where was he in a hurry? Peter had told him that his parents' house had burned down. Where would he go? "I'll go home anyway," the man decided. So he walked down the street. The villagers had already driven the cattle out into the field, and now everyone was busy in his yard and the vegetable garden. No one cared about the tall man who was walking along the road, looking around curiously. Andrew walked and marveled at the fact that his native village was still alive, not deserted, not lost. Did they build a new store in the center of the village and put a roof over the school? No, of course. There were abandoned farmsteads, but not so many. And then, familiar from childhood, appeared. Andrew remembered how this giant every summer covered everything with fluff, as if it stood like a cloud. His mother always scolded and demanded from his father to take down that poplar. But my father always found other things to do. But he didn't want to cut down the tree, which he planted when he himself was Maltsev. And he was afraid that the tree would fall on the house, covering the old house with its strong branches in the midday heat from the sun that had gone crazy. Mom smiled contentedly. It's a good thing they have such a protector. The others are in their houses, sweltering in the heat, and they're cool in the house of shadows. Father only hummed his bids contentedly. Oh, these women do not understand them. And now Poplar was still standing. Only the house was gone. Only burned from the hands of ink. Andrew stopped next to the nettles overgrown by the wood's nick. He sighed heavily and pushed the fiddle whose rusty wicket gate survived. His parents' house did not. Andrew strode across the yard and sat on the dibs. The barrel next to the burned, and the wall brooded. Here he is home. Only here, too, he was not expected. Will he have to go on wandering around the world like a stranger again? Who's roasting there? He heard a creaking, senile voice. What do you want for firewood? You are looking through the subway, but not yours. Move away. You can't see. The house is burned down, and as a beam falls on the beam will hit you on the head. Andrew looked back in surprise at the voice and saw in the neighboring yard a gray-haired old man. He squinted, remembering. Uncle Nick, is that you? He finally spoke up, recognizing the old man as his neighbor. "It used to be a skinny guy. You're a man. You're a real hustler." Aunt Miranda, his wife, only knew how to catch him off the wrong side of the tracks. Now he's just an ancient old man many years gone by. "That's right. I'm Nick," nodded the bewildered old man. "And who are you?" "I don't know." "Wait a minute, Andrew. You look like your dead daddy." In no time, Grandpa Nick waved over the fence. And now the two of them were sitting by the burnt house, talking. Nick told how he was the first to see the lightning strike in his parents' house, how then he called the firemen. They came quickly, but the house was old, almost burnt out. Only the walls were left. "So, are you going to your parents' grave or what?" the old man asked. "Or what?" Andrew answered briefly. "Boy, you need a break from the road, don't you?" the grandfather guessed. "Come to our place." "Yeah, let's go. And Miranda is mine. Only Rada will be there." "Will she?" Andrew grinned. "Uncle Nick, you probably know where I've been, don't you?" "I know. Why?" "It's none of my business. We only know you on the good side. Let's go get her some pancakes on a hot plate." "Thank you. But I'd like to go to the graves first." "That's right," nodded the old man. "Come on, I'll walk you out." And although Andrew wanted to walk alone, he realized that he couldn't get rid of his annoying neighbor. That's where they went to the village cemetery, which was very close by. On the way, Grandfather Nick told how Kelly had been brought to the village, how the chairman personally took care of all the funerals and affairs, how the whole village saw Andrew's mother off on her last journey. They walked down the street, and the grandfather told and told. Andrew listened glumly. On the way, they met several villagers. Someone recognized Andrew, said hello, nodded, and he responded. And then he felt that people were whispering and almost pointing their fingers. "Here," they said, "he came. His life demanded it. So he went to his native land." But Andrew tried not to pay attention to it and did not take offense. What did he want? No one was waiting for him with songs and a caravan. The cemetery was quiet. Only a lone crow sat on a birch in the center of the pogost and important. Occasionally seeing people, he suddenly fell silent, turned his head, then abruptly snapped and flew away. Away Noisy flapped his wings, as if expressing his indignation. "What's going on here?" "Uncle Nick, I alone want to sit by the grave," quietly said Andrew. "You're not offended?" "I understand. I'm not stupid," nodded back. "Your mom. I'm next to my father. Do you remember where his grave is?" "Why would I forget?" Andrew answered quietly and walked deeper into the cemetery. There's a familiar bed. The old paint is all peeled off. Andrew froze. Andrew clearly remembered how he and his father used to go to the woods for berries. Their way always passed near this very graveyard. Andrew was 8 years old, and he was always timid when he saw crosses and graves behind the fence. And his father, seeing his timidity, only patted his son on the shoulder. "You should not be afraid of the dead. All trouble comes from the living." Andrew then only looked at his father in surprise. And what is there to be afraid of the living? There are so many scary stories about the dead. And now, as time passed, Andrew realized how right his father was. Andrew also remembered how his mother liked to look at the sky, looking for the shape of animal birds in the next cloud. And one day she saw a house. Not even a house, but a palace. That's what it would be like to live in, Mom said with a smile. Andrew was about 10 years old at the time. He vowed one day to build a similar palace. Yes, then he really built, invented the architecture of buildings, but he never created a palace for Mom. Didn't have time. And now she's up there in the sky in some castle of her own, looking down at it from above. Andrew sighed. He looked around. How sad it was. And it's very hard to realize that you are alone in this world. But that's enough, Andrew. Andrew, look around. Yes, I'll paint the bed a little later. Better yet, replace the monuments to his father and mother. But that's for later, when he's back on his feet. But right now we have to clean up the weeds on the grave. How many weeds have grown here? Andrew cleaned it up. He sat beside me for a while with his head down. Then he stood up, whispered quietly, "Sing, my dears. I'm always with you now." Here. From the cemetery, Nick took Andrew back to his place, even though he said his wife was happy to have guests. But Andrew wasn't. Miranda was just finishing cooking in the kitchen when they entered the house. The woman pulled her husband away, leaving Andrew in the kitchen. He sat on the edge of a stool and waited patiently for the denouement. "Why did you bring that criminal into the house?" Andrew heard her loud whisper from the hallway. "The old fool has lost his mind. Is he going to kill us now or clean us up?" "Stupid broad," also whispered Nick. "Andrew is normal, but he has made a mess. But he has already answered for everything. You feed the man. He's tired from the road. He needs to rest. You tell him he needs to go to bed." Miranda continued to grumble. Andrew, realizing that he might cause a scandal, resolutely stood up. "You, forgive me, dear neighbors. I'll go," he said as he looked out into the hallway. "Where are you going?" "Pretending." Nick was surprised. "Are we going to have tea now?" "No, thanks. I don't feel like it." And under Miranda's judgmental gaze, Andrew left the house, and at Nick's grandfather's palace he saw Peter. "Where are you?" joyfully exclaimed the old teacher. "I was told that you came to the cemetery. I went, but I did not find you there, so I decided to come." "That's how sad it is," grinned Andrew. "I took the next train and followed you, but for nothing, I guess. I'm not welcome here either. Don't take offense at people. They're used to thinking in patterns. So you were a bandit." "They'll calm down. Let's go to my place. I'm afraid your wife won't understand you either." Andrew shook his head. "Kathy already knows that you've arrived and is heating the bathhouse for you. The jar is ready. How much does she need in the summer? Let's go. You'll get yourself cleaned up and have a rest. And tomorrow we'll go to the chairman of the village council. He'll be back from his business trip tomorrow. I already called him about you." Peter took Andrew by the sleeve and pulled him along like a bull. "Nothing to do. Andrew obey. Kathy is a quiet woman who has worked in the local library all of her life." She greeted Andrew in a friendly manner. First off to the baths, she handed him a clean set of clothes. "These are our son's clothes," she said shyly. "I think you'll be the same build, don't you?" "I'm sure we are. Our son is a great big man." Peter smiled. Andrew remembered David. He was a year older than their son. Indeed, he was tall, strong, not like his mother, not like his father, as they say. The villagers used to make fun of his parents, saying they had adopted him. But Peter and Kathy just smiled and admired their son. His own son, of course. Kathy's grandfather was young, and David was a fighter. He was a good kid, now a military man. Soon we were clothed in life, in clean clothes. Andrew was sitting at the dinner table with his hosts. There was a lot to eat. Hospitable Kathy, but Andrew just ate a little and immediately started to peck his nose. He was tired from the road. Peter took him to his son's old room, and there Andrew fell into a sweet sleep on clean sheets. For the first time so soundly in years, he dreamed of his childhood, he and his father fishing on the river. The fishing rod is so fragile, unreliable, and then the float jerks. Andrew tries to cut it off, but he fails. Then his father, abandoning his tackle, comes to his aid, and together they pull out a huge carp. "Dad, it's a fish," Andrew wonders. "What are we going to do with it?" "Let's let it go." Suddenly the father suggests. "How? It's so huge, isn't it? Can we do that?" "Yes, we can. Let it live." And my father carefully takes the fish off the hook and puts it into the water. Andrew looks into the mirror-like clarity of the water and sees the same carp, which swims away deftly. And he's so disappointed. He had caught such a huge fish. His father let it go. "Son, don't take offense at me," his father says to him. "We still catch many other fish, but let this one live." "Why?" Because he is the master of the water. And how can you leave a river without a master? It would all die. Andrew looks at his father, thinking he is joking, but he is quite serious. And he runs to the river. Mother hugs father. He picks her up in his arms. And suddenly a bright light. No mom, no dad, just a bright light. Andrew with difficulty opened his eyes straight to his face. The sun was shining on him. He didn't realize at once what time of day it was. Only when he looked at his watch did he even whistle. It was morning, so he had slept all day and night yesterday. Yes, fatigue had taken its toll. Soon Peter looked into the room and called for breakfast. "You haven't forgotten that we are going to see the chairman," the old teacher reminded. "I remember," nodded Andrew. "But I don't know what he will help me with. Maybe some abandoned house will give me a job." "What kind of work is there?" "There is a job," smiled Peter, "but he'll tell you about it himself. A job where I'll get a job with a criminal record." "Why did you give up on yourself?" The teacher frowned. "Did you answer for everything? So start honestly, a new life. That's all." Andrew only sighed. Everything is beautiful in words, but in reality, everything turns out differently. But he decided to talk to the chairman at the village council building of a brick building with a flag. He slowed down. Peter touched him by the sleeve. "Why are you a sparrow?" "I've been sent so many times these days. I don't know if I should go there." "Well, you should anyway. You're a new man, and the chairman needs to know everything about everyone." Peter shifted his eyebrows sternly. Andrew immediately remembered that this was the way he used to shrink his eyebrows at school when someone started to make noise in class. The man smiled at the memory and stepped boldly into the village hall. In the spacious office behind a large desk sat the chairman of the man about his age. Andrew said hello, introduced himself. He didn't seem to know him. His chairman suddenly blossomed into a smile. "Andrew, have you forgotten me?" he asked ringingly. And then Andrew remembered by his voice. "It's Alex, the very Alex with whom they used to run around the streets together before school, sometimes stealing apples from the locals. Once they stole peas from a collective farm field. What did they need them for? They didn't need it at all. But what an adrenaline rush, especially when the collective farm watchman complained. And then Alex and his parents moved to the district center and occasionally came to my grandmother for school vacations. And after school, they never saw each other again. Former friends hugged each other, talked with laughter, remembered past pranks. Peter, seeing that everything was in order, said goodbye and went out, deciding that they would get along without him. So decided to go home. Asked Alex, and I went there. I studied at the Institute of Public Administration in the district center and came back. I was offered to run here as a head. The people elected me. And now I am almost the mayor here. Alex smiled and looked questioningly at Andrew. How did you do it, friend? After all, everything was as you heard, both business and family. You're a fool yourself, Andrew frowned. All right, you don't want to. Don't talk. Let's talk business. I understand you need a place to live and a job. I can offer you a choice of 2 houses. They're abandoned, but they're decent. But there's another option where you can get a job and a house. How's that? I don't get it, Andrew. Do we need a huntsman? Alex confessed and told a sad story. There was their gamekeeper for many years. An old man. James lived on a farm. He had a strong house there. He kept a good eye on the forest and the animals in it. And then poachers came into the forest. The thing is that in recent years, the number of roe deer has increased. Moose came wild boars. So the poachers were scouring the forests in search of easy profit. James talked tough to them, didn't let them get away with it. He even managed to put a few of them away. Then they found the old man dead by the river. The police investigated and closed the case because they couldn't find the culprits. And even though everyone realized that the poachers had settled scores with the old man, there were no clues. And for almost a year, our forests have been unprotected. Bitterly sighed Alex. District, though they can be elite. But it is not that. In the forest, there should be a master. But how will you go? The salary there is not bad. I'm confused. Andrew, can I go? You can, nodded Alex. I've already found out. I agree. Andrew looked at him thoughtfully. And then he remembered today's dream, where his father said that there must be a master in the river. Alex was now talking about the master of the forest. It was like déjà vu, or it was a prophetic dream. So his father blessed him with a new job. I agree, he nodded to Alex. That's good. So let's go to the house. Look at it. You choose. What, Alex? Suddenly, Andrew stopped him. You said the old gamekeeper had a house. He is now intact. Intact, raised his eyebrows Alex. But in the forest about 5 kilometers from the village. Do you want to live there? To be honest, yes. You know, it's hard for me with people. I think everyone looks at me and judges me. But you got to stop looking at everybody. You're not going to have the nerve. In fact, maybe it's better to be alone with nature for a while. Get your mind right. And I'll come to you whenever I'll suddenly get out. Alex winked. I'll have a rest from my wife, and she from me. I moved her here with my daughter. How the people chose me. At first, she was pouting, but now she seems to have gotten used to the fact that we're bored with each other. Really? No, of course not. It's just that sometimes you have to take a break. That's what the friends agreed on. Alex took Andrew to the district authorities, vouched for him. And soon Andrew took a new position. He was now a gamekeeper. And so Andrew began a new life. The past history, it seemed, was no longer about him. He remembered Maria's betrayals less and less often. Andrew generally caught himself thinking that he didn't need anyone. He became like a lone wolf. And only in the forest he felt free and easy. The house of the old gamekeeper turned out to be quite in a difficult condition. Andrew fixed it up. Alex and Peter helped him for the first time with money and groceries. And Andrew lived in this forest cottage. He came out to people rarely, mostly in the district center. He bought groceries, drove an old car to work. But in a rare case, he still looked in the village store of the village council. The forest became his outlet, his medicine. Andrew liked to listen to birds singing in the morning. With a smile, he watched roe deer, which, without noticing him, often came very close to his dwelling. One day, Andrew was awakened by a noise. He jumped up, wondering what was going on outside. It felt like someone was trying to break through the wall of his cabin in the woods. Andrew looked out and was stunned. A moose stood against the wall. The wind scratched it sideways. Then the beast and the man met eyes. Oh, how the moose rushed into the forest thicket, as if a truck was carrying everything on its way. Andrew spent half a day mending the fence. Andrew's property was quiet. He hadn't noticed any poachers for months. But one day they all came. It was a straight autumn day. In the morning, the sun seemed to be trying at least a little about the common land and forest. But by lunch, waving hopelessly rays, hid behind gray clouds, froze rain and snow. Andrew was in no hurry to get outside, and should have been for a week. He had spotted several raccoon sightings of dogs, and they were causing quite a bit of trouble. It was necessary to find out exactly how many of them were roaming the neighborhood. It's a very harmful animal. If it disintegrates, it will kill all the hares and forests in the area, and come winter it will hibernate. Then it's a goner. Now we have to do the accounting. And then their chiefs calculate how many pieces can be given to hunters to this wild force. Andrew walked tightly stuffed in the hollow of his cloak and reasoning to himself, how has everything changed in nature? They used to have no one in the forest but hares and roe deer. Or did it seem so to him? Because he hadn't plunged into the natural world. It was good that at least there were no bears and wolves. Thank God. Avoided them. Something flashed in the bushes. Andrew only saw a fluffy black tail. It looked like a raccoon, like a dog. He stopped, and suddenly there was a rumble in the side. Then another. Who is it? He had no hunters today. And this part of the woods is off limits. There's a wildlife preserve just passing through here. Andrew cautiously walked towards the noise. And soon a terrible picture unfolded before him. 3 men were cutting up, or a huge, handsome elk. "It's standing," shouted Andrew. "Oh shit," swore one of them. "Brought it. Igor, take care of it." The huge men raised a gun and pointed it at Andrew. Andrew only had time to bounce as the shot rumbled, realizing that the structure he could not cope. He backed away and called the police, and the poacher kept firing, not realizing what he was doing. He was sober. Andrew was able to get around him, knock the barrel out, and tie him up. Seeing that the comrade turned on Andrew, the second one rushed with a knife. The huntsman deftly dodged and managed to twist the hands of the criminal. The third cowardly ran away into the bushes. He was found later by police officers. He was wandering through the forest. He got a little lost. This case made Andrew famous in the neighborhood. Everyone was talking about how Andrew took out 3 criminals, and he just laughed. Well, actually, 2/3 of them, and he almost died of fright. The only thing I felt sorry for in that situation was the moose. There's no bringing him back. The locals in the village became more respectful of their gamekeeper. Now there were no more whispers behind his back, and no one recalled Andrew's past. The married maidens would glance meaningfully in the huntsman's direction when he didn't show up in the village. But Andrew did not pay attention to all this. He did not need neither love nor friendship. He was on his own. Soon, though, he did make a real friend. That November evening, Andrew was returning from the district center. After the meeting, though the road was frozen, the car rolled confidently along the road. Ahead of our car drove a dark car. Suddenly, something flew out of the window of this car, and it increased its speed. Andrew saw it, swore, and obviously the garbage was thrown out. What kind of people? I'm coming up on a little ravine. Well, where did it go? This something from the car threw a squeamish look and immediately hit the brakes. In the ravine near the elderly grass, bushes rocket. He saw a black bag with something moving inside. Andrew got out of the car and reached down into the thick bag tightly sealed with duct tape. Someone was still kicking. There was either crying or squealing. Andrew pulled out a knife and cut the bag from the slit. A tiny puppy face peeked out, 2 to 3 weeks old at most. What freaks? Andrew whispered and took the poor little thing in his arms. The puppy immediately trustingly grabbed his finger and began to munch hungry. Andrew gently stroked the baby, slipped it under his jacket, and got back into the car. In the car, he put the animal in a small box. By the way, turned out to be in the cabin, put it next to him on the passenger seat, and drove to his place. What bastards, scolded Andrew on the way. They should be sealed in a bag and thrown out in the cold. It's okay, buddy, it's okay. Now we'll be there. I'll feed you. I put you to bed. You'll live with me. In fact, Alex has long offered him to take a dog. But Andrew was thinking about it. He was deciding what breed of age and sex it was better to get a puppy. And that's where chance helped. Andrew came out with a puppy named Buddy, and that's how it stayed. In a year, it was already a decent-sized dog, a mix of sheepdog and mongrel. Jack was devoted to his master and followed him everywhere along the forest paths. He was a very clever dog. He was the first assistant for Andrew. So they lived together in a forest hut. 2 years had passed since Andrew returned to his native place, and still he was alone. He never looked at women. His element, the forest, the vastness, and that's his whole life. But the local girls and young women went crazy. How can such a handsome man be alone? No one remembered Andrew's past. By his deeds, he earned trust and respect among the locals. But can a man be alone? That's why girls wandered around in the summertime not far from the gamekeeper's hut to get male attention. They gather berries and mushrooms, or look for herbs themselves. They are waiting to meet the gamekeeper. Andrew used to pass by with a nod, say hello, and go about his business. Further goes his friend, next to him still barking for order at the hapless sighing Miller. Mole, do not shally these here, and that's all. But one of the locals was particularly impudent Kate. The whole neighborhood knew the male population, especially the walker. She was beautiful, there's nothing to say. Eyes like almonds, ripe hair of the color that wing skin thin, straight porcelain, and a figure of palms. Just that her appearance when the nature of the unlucky, with whom only Kate did not walk with her mother, her Aunt Nancy. How many times had she been chased around the village with a rod? When she heard about her daughter's latest affair, she didn't give a damn. She stays for a month or two, and then she goes to the district center to look for love again. She's already tried everyone in the village, and she seemed to be not a fool, even graduated from some technical school. But she returned home from the city and sat on her mother's neck. And then Andrew fell in love with her. She did not go around and around like the others, and went straight to his house. It was a warm May evening. Andrew decided to go to bed early, as suddenly he heard a friend barking in the yard. He was literally off the chain. Andrew listened to the barking, as if he had already brought up poachers. No one even thinks of rampaging in his forests now. Or is it a beast? He opened the door cautiously. Kate stood on the porch, eyes lined, hair loose in a thin sundress. "Hi," she smiled. "Can I come in?" "What's that for?" Andrew grinned. "It's kind of nighttime already." That's exactly why she winked lightly at the boring tea alone. "Not at all. And you would go away from here, or mosquitoes will eat you." "Andrew, so I've been for you for a long time, and I like you, but everyone shuns me. So I decided to do it myself, even if you're lonely." "I understand." Andrew answered nothing, but stepped on the porch, took her hand, and pulled her back to the village. Oh, Kate was cursing on the way. How could she get away with such a beauty? Andrew led her into a clearing, pointed to a village visible nearby, and walked on. "And don't come to me again," he muttered, "or I'll let the dog off." He turned around and went into the woods. "What a fool," Kate shouted after him, "and you'll regret it." Andrew grinned at her and disappeared into the woods. Kate vowed to go home. She met her quietly at the first vegetable garden, the first gossip in the village. Everyone called her because she talked a lot. 3 matters of fact and no. And so her grandmothers called her Nana, and 3 nobody's names. I must say, and saw that Andrew led Kate out of the woods, and the old woman, all herself, already thought what they were talking about and did not hear. Yes, it was not so important that Kate was grooming our gamekeeper. With a wry smile, she greeted the maiden, and that Kate proudly raised her head and smiled back. "Yes, Andrew likes me. He invited me over. Why didn't he take you home? I didn't want the likes of you to come pouring in." Kate snapped at him and walked on. 3 draws, and the thin girl burst out laughing. The next day, the news spread through the village. The gamekeeper has a crush on a walking bum. She runs to him in the woods. He sees her off. Other candidates for Andrew's heart immediately took offense at Katerina, and she did not explain anything. She even liked such gossip that, "Look, and now Andrew will succumb." In the light of such events, she went to the gamekeeper a couple of times in the evenings, but each time he took her out of the woods without bread. Who knew about the last one, though? Kate walked around the village, proud, smiling mysteriously, and everyone believed. True, no one told Andrew directly, saying, "Why did he get involved with a wench?" Even Alex and Peter were tactfully silent when they met. It's none of their business. And it's understandable. A man lives alone in the woods. Obviously, he wants a woman's warmth. And then suddenly, they rounded up. "How are you, Kate?" Closer to August. The first change in appearance, of course, was noticed by her mother. "Oh, Kate's knocked up." Nancy's aunt still gasped. "What an idiot. Who's the father? Was he a gamekeeper?" Kate didn't answer anything, only smiled enigmatically, looking at her image in the mirror. "Kate, I'm asking you," demanded the mother. Reached habitually for a towel to slap the naughty daughter, but immediately came to her senses. Finally, Kate said, "Why are you so nervous? You know everything." "The whole village knows. Andrew knows. He's just guessing," Kate said. "I'll go and tell them today." "Oh, Kate, have you found a normal man?" Aunt Nina sighed. "God willing." And then she went to the store and whispered to the salesgirl in confidence about the daughter's pregnancy. In an hour, the whole village knew that the gamekeeper was about to become a father. But Andrew himself hadn't heard a word, as they call it. He continued to live in the forest with his faithful dog. Yes, Kate visited him sometimes. Andrew was only surprised at the girl's insistence. But during all this time, he had never even thought of starting a relationship with her. Just seeing Kate once again sighed, took her by the hand, and led her back to the village, explaining that nothing could be. Well, she was not his type. Kate took offense, saying, "Who is your type of beasts of the forest or old women?" Andrew only laughed. He was no longer offended by the not distant maiden. He was just waiting for her to get tired of going to him. And suddenly she was pregnant, and she wasn't really in a close relationship with anyone, just running around in the woods. And that day, Andrew was sitting on the porch of his cabin, as suddenly heard a car stop nearby in the clearing. "Buddy, ears on point." "Hush, boy," said Andrew, looking intensely into the distance. "Who's here to see us?" And then he saw that Alex was heading towards him. Andrew was surprised that the chairman was not often in his forest. Something must have happened. The young chairman had indeed come on urgent business. He had also heard about Kate's pregnancy. And then he couldn't keep quiet any longer. What's Andrew doing? Did he find someone to contact? Okay, he went out with her. But a baby changed everything. Alex didn't beat around the bush. Around and came right out. "Andrew, you're a grown man. Couldn't you find a serious woman?" "I don't get it." Andrew stared at him. "What chick? What are you doing with Kate? And what are you after?" "I stayed out of your relationship. I understand that nature demands it, but a baby changes everything. Now you have to marry her." "To who?" Andrew's stunned. "To Kate." "Why?" "Because you got her pregnant. The village is abuzz with the news. I got Kate pregnant." Andrew clapped his eyes and could not find words from amazement. "But how is that impossible?" "Andrew, but you can tell me anything. I'm telling you nothing happened with her. She came to me." "That's true. She looked me in the eye and offered herself. But I always revived her, didn't I?" "What do you want? I swear you're not lying." "I'm not lying." "What stupid women. They're trying to mess with everyone and me too." "Kate, she's telling everyone that you're the father of her child." Alex was indignant. What does a man hope for? Just stupid. Andrew grinned. She said the first thing that popped into her head. And now she believes it herself. "I need to talk to her. She's in the village now. Don't you know?" "I think so." Soon the villagers saw a car pull up in front of Aunt Nina's house. Andrew got out of the car and walked leisurely into the yard. Kate was hanging the laundry. They were humming something. "Hi, Kate." Andrew called out to her. Kate turned pale when she heard his voice. She almost let go of the basin. "Hello," she mumbled. "Why don't you say something to me?" He came up and looked her in the eyes with a testing look. "They told me that I'm going to be a father soon. Only I cannot understand how to," as lowering his eyes, mumbled Kate. "You don't know." "I don't know. I was just holding your hand. And you suddenly, in the position of the most not funny and not ashamed." "Not ashamed," whispered Kate. She lifted her head and looked Andrew in the eye. "I told everyone we were together. You can't prove it to anyone. So you're just going to take me on like that. Take it any way you want. Only now everyone in the neighborhood knows I carried you off. And if you refuse, everyone will be on my side." "Kate, come on. That's no way to start a relationship." Andrew shook his head and left the yard. What the village said about the gamekeepers afterwards. Yeah, Kate was a bit of a troublemaker, but he knew who he was messing with, especially to the hysteria of a failed son-in-law. Aunt Nancy And Kate walked around the village with a proud look, resentfully pressed her lips. When someone asked her about the father of the child, however, not everyone believed in this version of the chairman Peter, their wife, and a few other serious people in the village believed that Andrew simply talked. He himself preferred to remain silent to all the questions and accusations of the villagers. But why make excuses for something that didn't happen? Once, however, when he was particularly pestered by sharp tongues, I met Katerina and threatened that he would file a report to the police for slandering him. Kate sort of collapsed then, didn't take it lying down, and then it was back to business as usual. Andrew waved goodbye. They'll talk and calm down. People really bought tongues. When Kate gave birth, everyone was just numbed by what had happened, and the first one was shocked. The midwife who delivered the baby, she looked at the baby and almost sat down on the floor in the hall. Kate Black gave birth to him Plinko, like a chocolate bar. A new wall lip. Such in the provincial maternity hospital has not yet appeared in the world. When Kate saw her baby, she was mad as hell. Then she confessed to the other new moms in the ward that she had a fleeting affair with a black guy when she went to the city for a week to a friend. Then she had another one-night stand with a white guy. Kate thought she got pregnant by a white guy, so she blamed it on the gamekeeper. Why wouldn't she? She's walking, she's not talking. Almost everybody believed her that he was the father. And then, just like that, there's a little black baby. The girls' nurses calmed the hapless mother that the baby will not be pure black anyway. He is a half-breed, and half-breeds are always beautiful. But that didn't make it any easier. She couldn't even look at her baby. I didn't even want to pick her up from the hospital. Nancy's aunt, when she heard about the accident, also fell into a stupor. She had already found out about genetic expertise. She asked knowledgeable people about the gamekeeper's salary and how much alimony she could get from him. And there's a black kid. And Andrew had nothing to do with it. Oh, it's worth Aunt Nana's reread. People are going to laugh. Kate's an asshole, and she didn't want to take her grandson out of the hospital either. And probably they would have left the baby in the maternity hospital. But then Kate remembered about the maternity capital. And who cares what kind of baby? She would get the money. So Kate was discharged with the baby. Nancy's aunt picked them up from the hospital. Never even looked at her grandson once. It was early December. 3 weeks had passed and people were getting into the swing of Christmas preparations. Everyone seemed to have forgotten about the baby story. Why should they care? She's the one who has to raise it. Andrew was finally able to breathe out, and only sometimes with a smile remembered how Kate wanted him. Against his will to be a father and make him a father. And then came December 25th. That year it was so bitterly cold. People were hiding in their houses, dogs and concerts were closed, birds were freezing on the fly. That evening Andrew decided to check the moose and feeders. It was stomach churning and especially necessary in this cold. He hadn't celebrated Christmas in so many years, and he wasn't going to this year. Though both Alex and Peter were calling him over. Andrew decided to wait for the chimes, to eat a piece of meat with his friend, who moved to his house in such frosty weather, and go to bed. In the meantime, he had to check the feeders. Andrew put on his hunting skis, threw his backpack loaded with salt, and went to the feeders. The frost seemed to get even more prickly. Andrew lost his mittens and cheeks. No need to linger. Can I get a Frosty? He went on his way. Soon he was already in place. He added salt, spread the brooms, made sure there was plenty of grain, and headed back. His friend, shrieking with joy, turned around and stopped too. Poor guy. It's all right. We'll warm it up now, Andrew told him with a smile. Buddy ran down the beaten track first, and suddenly, not reaching the house 100 meters, friend stopped at the mossy, barely hanging shadow. He growled. Who did you smell there? Worried Andrew Hare, or is it a hare? Although the dog's reaction was more like that of a wolf. Andrew raised his gun. Now he would meet the gray one properly. And then, friend froze, and then behind the scenes crawled the wattles covering the trunk of the tree. Andrew stood in bewilderment and thought, And then he heard from under the ground some sound. At first, he thought that he had something wrong with his head, but then he realized that it was not. It's a baby crying. Quietly and doomed, so Andrew reached the fir tree, lifted its fluffy paw, and saw a basket like the one he goes to the mushrooms with. Only not mushrooms were in it, but an old thick plate with a motor roll. And from this roll a thin cry could be heard. Andrew stretched out his hand to unwrap the plate and make sure that he was not being deceived, but immediately stopped. It was freezing outside, and if the child really freezes, Andrew grabbed the basket and rushed as fast as he could to his hut to race with his friend. The dog didn't bark or squeal, but ran beside him and washed him. "Why, master, are you carrying the find?" Andrew, clutching the basket to his chest, remembered how he had once found a friend, also thrown away unnecessary, only in a bag and in a ravine. And Andrew very much did not want to believe that the basket wrapped in plaid was a puppy and not a child. After all, a man can't do that to his cub. Back home, the first thing Andrew did was to throw off his jacket, put the basket by the stove, and with trembling hands began to unwind the plaid. And then he saw his find. He saw it, and he was stunned. It was indeed a baby, black as coal. "Kate threw it away," Andrew whispered. "What a bastard." The baby, still wrapped in the blanket, no longer cried, but only opened its mouth to cry. Apparently, he had no more strength. How long had he been in the cold? Andrew got goosebumps when he imagined what the baby had experienced. What would have happened if his friend hadn't smelled him? And he passed on by. Andrew took a cursory look at the toddler, seemingly not fainting. Feels pretty normal, just exhausted, poor thing. But that's understandable. And he wants his mommy to hold him. What kind of mother is that? Kate is a she-wolf who would tear her cub to pieces. A bird's eye for an eye, but this one's left to die in the cold. Andrew ineptly took the baby in his arms, shook the baby. It's a sin. He came to his senses a little and screamed with all his might. "Brother," what a loud voice. Andrew grinned. "We're going to call for help." Andrew called an ambulance, explained the situation, then also called the police to the ambulance, having learned that it was necessary to loop the snowy road in the woods. They were a little puzzled. "How can I find you?" "Maybe you to us, and I will not go," Andrew answered firmly. "The child is cold, and I don't need to carry him around in the frost. Let's you come to me here from village 5 kilometers. There is a cleared road right up to the forest. You call me when you arrive." I set up a meeting at the trailhead for the dispatcher, and she agreed. But the police were very surprised by Andrew's message. "Listen, you called an ambulance." "That's good," answered him the duty officer. "Let the doctors take the child away. Why should we go to the woods now? Be a human being. Let the people at least celebrate Christmas in a human way. And tomorrow the district officer will come and sort it all out." The child was thrown out in the cold. "You understand," Andrew objected. "That's endangerment. He could have died." "I understand," sighed the duty officer, "but nothing terrible happened. We'll sort it all out tomorrow with Christmas," and hung up without hearing Andrew's reply. "Merry Christmas," Andrew answered, already listening to the short beats. Then he looked thoughtfully at the baby. He quieted a little, flew in his basket. Andrew smiled. What a miracle he had found at Christmas. He would never have believed it if someone had told him. The phone rang, distracting Andrew from his thoughts. It was the ambulance. He put on the floor, left the bull, and walked out of the house, ordering his buddy to guard the baby. The dog even nodded in response. Smart. He understood perfectly well what an important mission his master had entrusted to him. Andrew walked along the path to the ambulance. The car stood at the edge of the forest, the driver cowering at the raised hood. "Oh shit, I think it's gone into overdrive," he was cursing. Next to him stood a short woman doctor in a down jacket. "Nah. Oh, where did you get in?" Shook his head and said she approached him, Andrew, and barely made it. How back? Now I don't know. On your own, if anything, the man replied. Come quickly. Who's your child with? Did the woman freak out? With a dog, with a dog. Are you out of your mind? You're offering to take me with you. He had to be dragged along, Frost, replied Andrew glumly. Well, yes, agreed the doctor. She grabbed the suitcase, shouted to the driver to call her when he fixed the car, and frantically rushed to catch up with Andrew. Buddy, seeing the guest, first growled and then wagged his tail. The baby at the same time quietly whimpered in the basket. Why is he on your floor by the stove? Doctor, this is the warmest place. Justifying himself, Andrew answered and helped to take off the woman's down jacket. No down jacket and thick hats. The doctor looked like a very young girl. She carefully took the baby out and examined it. From her preliminary examination, the baby was perfectly healthy. The frost hadn't managed to hurt him. There wasn't even a fever. Then the girl filled the baby in the clean sheet Andrew had given her. After pulling out the dry formula bottle she needed to feed him, "Do you have warm, brick water?" the doctor asked sternly. Andrew rushed to the kettle. The water was just the right temperature. The girl deftly diluted the mixture and then took the baby in her arms and began to feed. The baby greedily grabbed the bottle. Andrew's heart even snapped when he saw this. How hungry is he? Andrew thought of Kate again in an unkind way. And the girl from the ambulance fed the child, held him a little column, then pressed him to herself and began to shorten, humming softly some song. Andrew involuntarily admired this picture, and the girl, who forgot to sing, she as if did not notice Andrew, cradling the baby, thinking about her own. The baby's asleep. We should put him somewhere. Until Nick fixes the car, she whispered, looking at Andrew questioningly. Yeah, sure, he fussed. Let's go to my couch. Andrew and the doctor sat down next to the boy. Excuse me, what's your name? Andrew asked in a whisper. Julia. The girl Julia replied in a whisper. Maybe I can take you to the hospital with the driver. Why is he there in the cold? And tomorrow the car will be picked up. No, he will not leave. The ambulance shook her head. Julia, and who will? We only have 2 cars to fix today. It's a busy night. There's going to be a lot of calls. Yes, does it work for you? Andrew shook his head and then looked at his watch. By the way, it's Christmas in 10 minutes. Let me at least open some champagne. What are you doing? I'm at work. Oh yeah, I'll have a hot cup of tea then. Andrew made a cup of strong flavored tea, put on the table candy, fruit, meat cutlets. Merry Christmas, Julia. He smiled. Merry Christmas, she replied. I have a feeling next year is going to be very interesting. This is the surprise I got from the human baby. I'm seeing for the first time. And guess how he got here? Yes, I know Andrew, Kate told me. Julia remembered the story too. Heard it from a coworker. The absentee mom gave her baby to her then. But who knew she would do such a thing? There was a loud knock on the door, and Nick, the driver, poured in like Santa Claus. Julia was happy. What's ready? Smiled the driver. But can I warm up at your place? Sure. Andrew poured another cup of tea. Just like that, hot tea with candy, fun, and conversation. They celebrated Christmas. Buddy, sleeping peacefully by the stove. The baby was snoozing on the sofa. Andrew, how cozy is your place? Julia smiled. But we have to go. Yes, of course, Andrew sighed. Can I ask, do you think Kate's baby won't be given away? I don't think so. I don't think so. Nick answered for Julia. Now the baby has only one road to the orphanage, and frankly speaking, you can't envy his fate. It's going to be hard on him. Why are you frowning so emphatically, Julia? Maybe things will work out. Do you believe it yourself? The driver grinned. It's just that ordinary kids from the orphanage get a rare lucky break. This one's black, and he's going to be abused. Julia just sighed. She bit the baby in the plate. Andrew also gave his own in addition. then walked the doctor and the driver to the ambulance after sitting at the window and looking at the starry sky. He remembered the same picture. Julia holding the baby in her arms, rocking him, singing the song, and for the first time in years, Andrew suddenly realized what he was missing in his family. And also, he could not forget Julia's eyes, so clear, blue, but in them there was some sadness, its own mystery. For the first time, New Year's morning in the forest ranger's cabin was crowded. A police task force had arrived. They took a statement from Andrew. They examined the tree, took the basket with the baby in it, and they went to Nancy and Kate's aunt's house. Andrew went with them. I really wanted to see what had done so ruthlessly to their child. I wondered if Kate would show any remorse, only there was no Kate at home. Nancy's aunt met them with a glower. She told them that one of her former suitors had shown up at her daughter's house yesterday evening. They fought loudly at first, and then made up. Kate and him went into town. Aunt Nancy rebelled, tail wagging again, and Kate's baby just grimaced. She didn't want that baby, and neither does her lover. But the mother insisted, "It's your child, so raise it." Then the suitor shaved off the baby. Catcha. Did they all get into his car and drive away? Aunt Nancy didn't know where. She cried all night, realizing that she had given her daughter a child for nothing, whatever it was. But it's small, helpless. The station attendant, to reassure her, told her that the baby was safe at the hospital. Aunt Nancy seemed to rejoice and immediately became puzzled. And the daughter of her no good and where? "We'll look for her," the investigator told her. We had a lot of questions to her. What the woman was confused. For example, how the child ended up in the forest. Aunt Nancy gasped and shed tears again. And then again, the district officer began to calm her down, promising that after all the proceedings the child could be given to the grandmother under guardianship. But obviously parental rights will be deprived, and they will be tried. How to judge? Clashing woman freak, say my evil. If you want, you can check the child in the hospital, breaking away from the protocol, said to her investigator. He's fine, the doctors reported. Why should I visit him? Unexpectedly angry, the woman replied. I don't want to. Let them take him to an orphanage. He's nothing but trouble. Oh, my Kate. And Aunt Nancy, again flooded with tears. The policeman and the gamekeeper looked at her with surprise. After all, it's clear in whom. Poor child's daughter was not needed, neither mother nor grandmother. What a family. Katerina and her suitors were detained the same day in the district center. They were out at the Happy Lovers Cafe. Kate had forgotten all about her child, but when at the police station she was pressed a little, suddenly cried and began to claim that this family had her new old love convinced to get rid of the baby. At first, they wanted to just throw him out on the road. Then Kate suggested they leave him at the door of the gamekeeper's hut. But she didn't go to the forest. Liam carried the basket himself. There was a path there. Clearly, there was a place to go. But he didn't carry the basket home. He hid it in the woods, left the baby to die. And if it hadn't been for his friend, for his instincts, Andrew would have just passed by. Kate, when she learned where her lover had abandoned the baby, turned a little pale. Then she pulled herself together with a shrug. But she didn't freeze, did she? That's all she said. Why are you all so worried? You're not a woman. You're a beast, the investigator told her. Kate lowered her eyes and curled her lips. Everyone's going to judge her now. Why does she need this child? She wanted to leave it in the hospital. It's definitely the mother's fault. She convinced her, so she blamed everyone around her, just not herself. Then Kate was tried and given a real sentence. But that was later. In the meantime, a tiny little black boy was lying in the children's ward of the district hospital. The whole ward staff went to see him as if on a tour. Soon the little boy became the favorite of the ward. The boy ate well, grew up, no different from his peers, and only his appearance was exotic for our place. They named him Steph and Kate. I didn't even bother to give my son a name. Julia is the doctor from the ambulance. She also came to see the baby several times. Interestingly, but in her arms, he fell asleep faster and was calmer. And also the baby looked at Julia so seriously, as if he knew some secret and wanted to tell her something. The girl felt that every day more and more attached to the baby and could not do anything about it. After work, it was as if she was drawn to the children's ward. There she would change the boy's clothes, feed him, sing songs to him, and think about her own thoughts. 3 years ago, Julia had a tragedy in her life. She was a mom at the time. Her son was only 6 months old when she received a call from the ambulance station and was tearfully asked to substitute. The thing is that 2 paramedics were sick and there was no one to go to the calls. Julia, who was on maternity leave, consulted with her husband. At the time, the husband had been made redundant and was sitting at home. They decided that Rob would take maternity leave and Julia would go to work. The young mother left her son with her husband with a calm heart. Rob was responsible. He loved his son very much. Julia was in a great mood that day. The challenges are not difficult. Soon this shift would be over. There was no heartbeat. When the call came that in the center of the village, drunk, the driver hit a man with a baby at the crosswalk. And when she got out of the car, her legs went limp. In a pool of blood lay her Rob and her son Frank. The son died on the spot, and Rob died 24 hours later. Julia. The earth seemed to stop. Her heart changed. She howled like a wolf all night long. She wanted to write a letter of resignation, but the head of the ambulance persuaded her to stay. "Work is healing," she said at the time. And Julia listened to her. Indeed, over time it became easier. The pain did not go away, but it dulled. Julia worked, not sparing herself, took extra duty, substituted everyone at the first request, just to avoid being at home, where everything reminded of her husband and son. And now it had been 3 years since she had been alone. Julia decided that now she would live only her work. But that New Year's Eve, something inexplicable happened. No, she'd been called to the babies before, but never had Julia felt anything. And then she just held that little boy in her arms. It warmed her heart. Julia rocked him. She sang him a song and remembered her Frank. She felt like he was right there in her arms. Of course, Julia realized that it was just a bad emotion, but she couldn't help it. Then she began to go to the hospital, realizing that this black baby becomes her own. The unhappy young woman's condition quickly changed. The head of the pediatric department, Vanessa, she called a colleague in and told her off like a girl. "What the hell are you doing, Julia?" she said sternly. "Why are you getting attached to this baby? You know very well that in a month we have to transfer him to a baby home." "I understand, but I can't," Julia whispered. "I'm drawn to this baby. Julia, my girl," the headmistress softened her tone. "I understand. You've been through such grief. But understand, this is not the baby you want. You'll have another one of your own. This baby is a nice baby, but it's a stranger. And realize that. And if I adopted him," Julia suddenly revealed her deepest desire to adopt. The superintendent's eyes rounded. "Julia, wake up. He's black. Why would you do that? Who cares what color his skin is? I mean, he's like family to me. It's all your emotions. Forget it. Besides, I doubt they'll let you adopt. You're emotionally unstable. You're lonely. Ear pay isn't that great. No, it's a waste. Julia, forget it. Take care of your personal life. Trust me, you can be happy." "Who is he?" The superintendent doesn't understand. "Steph. And Steph will be quite happy. Only somewhere else." Julia didn't argue, left the headmistress, and went to the child welfare office. She was told roughly the same thing as the head of the children's ward, although they did give her a list of papers required for adoption. Without putting it off, Julia started to collect the documents. And as she realized, the main problem was that she was single. That January day, they bumped into each other by chance at the door of the pediatric ward. Julia was coming out of the wall. It was the first time Andrew had ventured over to visit his godson, as he now called the rescued and the boy. Andrew recognized Julia immediately. He was glad for some reason. And Julia was glad to see Andrew. Only her cheeks suddenly cried with embarrassment. "Are you here to see Steph?" Julia asked. "I brought him a toy." Andrew took a teddy bear out of the bag. "He can't have toys like that." Julia shook her head. "He's only interested in rattles." "Yes," Andrew said disappointedly. "I like that bear so much, so I bought it." "Well, leave it next to the crib. Do you know where the baby is?" "Which room?" "They said you can go to room 5. Come on, I'll walk you out." And they went to Steph. The baby was asleep. Andrew quietly approached the crib, put the bear, looked with interest at the sleeping child. "How uninterested," Andrew whispered. "And not black at all. It's more like chocolate." "He will be like that, because he was born of different races," whispered Julia. "I think Steph will be a handsome boy." A tear glistened in the corner of her eye. Andrew noticed it, but tactfully kept silent. They walked out of the room, out of the ward. Both were silent. "Let's drink coffee and eat some cakes." Suddenly, Andrew suggested. "Are you in no hurry? It's my day off today, and my husband won't argue." Andrew tried to joke, trying to understand the girl's marital status. Julia turned pale, and only Andrew realized what he had blabbed, apologized unnecessarily. And then, sitting in a cafe, Julia told him her story. And then Andrew also confessed that he sat there and for the first time in his life admitted that he had answered for someone else's sin. For some reason, he wanted Julia to know the whole truth. "Did you love her so much?" Julia asked. "I did," Andrew confessed. "Then I hated her. And now, I don't even remember." "Don't you regret changing your life so radically? You lived in NY. You were a businessman. And now you work in the woods as a simple gamekeeper." "Not at all. I'm only now realizing that I didn't belong there. Obligations to my father-in-law, to my wife. I owed them all. And they only used me. And when things went wrong, they didn't just throw me out. It was only afterwards that I realized what despicable people life had brought me into contact with. And I'm very grateful that it did in the end." Andrew said this and fell silent. Julia was also silent, looking out the window. It was snowing outside, large fluffy snowflakes swirling in the air, falling on the houses and trees of passers-by. And the picture outside the window seemed different, as if a new page of life had begun. "Andrew, I want to adopt Steph." Julia suddenly confessed. "Do you think I'm crazy too?" "Don't be embarrassed. I've had a lot of people hint at it in a short time." "I don't think so. For some reason that boy is dear to me too," Andrew confessed. "When I think of him in that basket, my heart sinks." "Yes, I understand," Julia replied. "I'm not allowed to adopt him. I'm lonely." Andrew suddenly froze, and then said, "Let's get married and raise Steph together." Julia froze, looked at Andrew in surprise, and then blushed deeply. "Well, we barely know each other. We don't like each other." "Barely audible," she said, "but that's for now." Andrew also said quietly. Julia was finally embarrassed. She got up from behind and hurried to the exit. Andrew caught up with her, apologized for the indelicacy. They said goodbye and exchanged phone numbers. A week went by. One morning, Andrew's phone rang. He heard an excited female voice. "Andrew, what you said to me at the cave still stands." "Julia, is that you?" He was surprised. "Yeah, here's the thing. Steph is going into foster care in a week. Guardianship won't let me adopt him, just like they said. All because I'm not married." Got it," Andrew answered briefly. "Meet me at the registry office. Don't forget your passport." Andrew jumped into his car and rushed to the district center. On the way, he dialed Alex and asked for his assistance as the head of the settlement. He must have acquaintances in the administration. "So how is it that you urgently need to get married?" Alex was surprised. "Like this. I'll explain everything later. Now tell me if you can help or not, answered Andrew. And I will try. The same day Julia and Andrew signed. Then we went to the guardianship office. And where do you live? Andrew was asked at the guardianship. At my place, Julia answered without blinking an eye. Andrew only nodded in agreement. When they left the guardianship office, he whispered to her, "You said you wanted to raise a duck too." Julia grinned. "Or did you change your mind?" Andrew only smiled confusedly. Of course, he hadn't thought of moving so quickly, but the circumstances demanded it. A couple of days later, he moved in with Julia, taking a friend who had settled in the yard of her private house. Now it took Andrew much longer to get to work, but that didn't upset him at all. For some reason, he felt really good with Julia. Yes, at first, they lived as neighbors, even when they took Steph to their place, and after a few months suddenly realized that their essentially real marriage had fallen apart. It had become the real thing. Feelings that had been dormant for years suddenly came out in full force, and they became the happiest people in the world. Julia was on maternity leave to care for Steph. Andrew traveled to his property by car, and life went on as usual. And not for a second did these two no longer doubt that they had made the right choice. Their son grew up a bright boy, pleased them with his successes. In the village at first everyone was surprised to see an unusual boy, and then everyone got used to it. Steph was a wonderful child, kind and affectionate. Everyone in the neighborhood loved him, called him Chocolate Boy. And after a few years, Andrew was able to build a new house. Soon he also got a new position, headed up the species hunting society in the neighborhood. Yes, he had changed everything in his life, and now realized it was all for the better. His family had increased as well. When Steph was 3 years old, Julia gave birth to a daughter, Emily. And a year later, a son, Alex Stiff, as an older brother, helped his mother. He looked after his little sister and brother. For the first time, the boy asked why he looked different. When he was about 7 years old, just before school, Julia and Andrew decided not to hide the story of his birth from their son. Of course, they didn't tell him that his own mother had abandoned him in the cold, and his own grandmother had almost happily given him up. No, they just explained to Steph that he was born to another woman by a man of a different race. But he's still family to them. One day they went on vacation to the sea. They had a few hours in NY, and the parents decided to give the children a little excursion. In the step then was 10 years of our family. Alyosha, 6 all already understand something. They are interested in everything. After the walk, they went into a cafe to have a snack, and then Andrew saw his first wife. He immediately did not recognize her, full of cheap, dressed women, sat at the table and drank coffee. But here their eyes met by chance. Yes, she had changed, but her eyes were the same gray, as if transparent. Maria was the first to recognize him, shuddered and turned pale. She wanted to leave, but then got up and headed to their table. "Hi," she said simply. "Long time no sees. This is your family." Julia looked at her and Andrew in surprise, and he was silent, picking up words to answer that it was not her business to be rude, though he wanted so much. "Yes, my family is at peace," he replied. She grinned, and that too. She nodded unceremoniously toward Steph. The boy understood and lowered his head in resentment. Andrew did not intend to tolerate such rudeness any longer. "This is my eldest son," barely holding back, he replied. "I see you. You have not spared your life." "Everything with my life is fine," snarled Maria, and went away. And Julia continued to look at her husband. With astonishment, Andrew, "Who is it?" she asked quietly. "The one who ruined my life, as it seemed to me before. It turns out, ruined hers," he answered, looking thoughtfully after Maria. She went to the bar, had a few words with the bartender, and left. "You described her like that." Julia couldn't find the words. "Well, like a socialite. And here she's just an ordinary aunt in Chinese chic." "Shocked myself," Andrew admitted. "I didn't follow her life. or her father's life at all. Now, you know, it's getting interesting. I think I'm going to go ask Borman something. And soon the bartender, for a small fee, told Andrew Maria's story. Turns out she used to work at this cafe as a dishwasher. She was recently fired for not doing a good job. But she still comes here, hopes they'll hire her back. Surprisingly, Andrew, I knew her different. Rich, successful. So it was in a past life. The bartender smiled. I'd heard a little about it. He told me that Maria's father had died suddenly. Her husband had managed to take over the business, leaving her with nothing, and then divorced her, taking the mansion as well. Yes, she was a lawyer herself, but her father had paid for her education, so she didn't understand much about the profession. At first, Maria didn't realize the gravity of the situation and spent the last of her money. And one day the account was completely empty. Her friends and girlfriends disappeared. Her lover left her. She started drinking. Lived in a small apartment, which then had to sell and move into a communal apartment. She didn't get a decent job, so she got a job as a waitress, a cleaner, a dishwasher. Over the years, her appearance took its toll. She's lost her shape, and now it's just a simple aunt. There are many of them in the world. Andrew listened and realized that nothing feels neither anger nor joy. It turns out that he does not care at all. What happened to this Maria? However, she got what she deserved. After Andrew and his family had a wonderful vacation at the sea, and they returned to their village. Life went on as usual, and Andrew did not remember the meeting with his first wife. He had his own cares and troubles, but fate threw his family another meeting. One day in the fall, they gathered the whole family for a walk in the forest, to rest and mushrooms. To gather in the forest was wonderful. They returned with a full basket of mushrooms. On the way back, Andrew suggested Julia to look in the native back. We should have taken the weave from my parents' grave. You and the guys will sit in the car, and I'll get the weed. He spoke. I'll help you too. Dad cleans up on the graves of my grandparents, Steph said. Andrew nodded and smiled. A real helper is growing up, leaving Julia with Dasha and the cart at the graveyard. Andrew and Steph went to the grave. They cleaned up in 10 minutes and headed back. Andrew noticed fresh graves near the fence. Some woman, not recognizing her, he silently passed by, but suddenly heard her cry out. Andrew, Huntsman, are you? It was Kate Thin. Exhausted, she walked towards them, smiling stupidly. It's definitely you, she spoke. Wow, you've gotten so important. Who's that? She froze for a second, swayed, then smiled again. My son. That's my son, Andrew said, taking Steph's hand and walking away. Where are you going? Kate shouted. And to talk. Why aren't you being friendly? I wanted to tell you my story. My mom died in May. I only made it to the funeral. But Andrew didn't listen to her. He almost ran out of the pogost, put his son in the car, jumped in, and started the engine. Why are you so excited? Julia was surprised and saw Kate coming out of the gate. Who is it? Andrew didn't answer anything, only shook his head, saying, I'll talk to you later. That aunt has accumulated some kind of hoarding. Stupa answered for her. Julia farted in response. At home in the evening, when the children were asleep, Andrew explained who he saw at the cemetery. So she was released, Julia sighed. But that was to be expected. Let her live her life. The main thing is that she doesn't touch us and doesn't go to the wall. Andrew answered her, but he had hoped for nothing. The next day, Kate appeared in the district village and found Andrew's house. Andrew was at work, Steph and Emily at school, Alex at daycare. Julia came home after duty and decided to make a quick dinner for the family, then get some sleep. There was a knock on the gate. The aged friend, though he could not hear well, heard the sound, and Julia got worried. He went out to see who was there, who was drumming so unceremoniously. At the gate stood a woman Julia saw at the cemetery. Are you the wife of the gamekeeper? Unceremoniously asked the guests. I am to you, what calmly answered Julia. So it was you who took my son. Took, Julia asked me again, or picked him up when you threw him out in the cold with your lover. Don't be smart, Kate bellowed, once again on Julia with a strong booze. My son did what she wanted. According to the papers, it's my son, and Andrew's son. Get out of here before I call the police. Julia raised her voice. To hell with the police. I'm not afraid of them. Prison is my mother, Kate. But if you don't want your eldest not to worry, then money me and your huntsman collect $10 all I need. No way. Julia grinned. So you are going to pull money from us? No, I just suggest that you pay me so that I do not violate the tender child psyche of your eldest son, or I'll walk up to him on the street and tell him what a mom I am. Yeah, you used to be pretty, but prison took it all away. Do you think it'll be nice for your son to see his own mom? He'll probably cry with joy. You bastard. You're angry, Julia. Get out. You won't get a penny from us. Steph already knows we're not his biological parents. He knows, but he's going to see his mommy. I'm impressed. Kate didn't back down, ignoring Julia's harsh tone. But she didn't want to talk to this low woman anymore. She closed the wicket and went out into the yard. Sleepiness was gone. Julia prepared lunch, went to the school, met the children. Usually they came themselves, but this time the woman was worried that if they were abnormal, she would go to her eldest son to talk to him. Such a biological mother would definitely not improve Steph's mood. Julia waited until Emily and Steph came out of the school gate. Mom, why are you meeting us? Steph was surprised. I can drive Dasha home myself. I just wanted to. Julia smiled. Why don't you rest? You need to sleep now. Steph told Julia off, as if he were an adult, not her. You're my good man. The woman smiled. I promise. I'll sleep next time. Now let's go home. I've made your favorite sauce. She hugged the children, and all three of them walked home together. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Katerina outside the school. So she's really determined to grind her nerves. What to do with her? In the evening, Julia told Andrew everything. Why would we pay her? Andrew raised his eyebrows. Steph knows perfectly well that he is a stranger to us by blood. You can't hide that difference in appearance. That's not what she's emphasizing. You see, she sees that our son is growing up in a normal environment. Everything is fine. He has friends at school, and then suddenly some homeless kid wants to instill an inferiority complex. What a bastard. Andrew bent over. So maybe we should tell Steve ourselves. I don't know how it'll take it. I mean, we always told him his mom just abandoned him. But we never told him that she left him out in the cold, and especially not that she went to jail for it. Yeah, he's too young to know the whole truth. Andrew agreed. He's not a little kid. Suddenly, they heard their son's voice. It turned out that Steph had gotten up to drink water and had heard their conversation. Andrew and Julia were as confused as children. Mom, Dad, I don't care who gave birth to me and how that woman lives now. Steph said calmly. I even understand why she threw me away, as you say. I'm another non-white. So what? You love me. And that's the main thing. The boy came up and hugged his parents, and they breathed a sigh of relief. It turns out they have such a mature, sensible son. Kate approached Steph the next day, when the boy and his little sister were returning from school. Hello, Steph, she spoke. The boy is black. Do you know that I gave birth to you? Steph looked carefully at the unpleasant woman and shrugged her shoulders. Well, now I will know what betrayal looks like, said indifferently the boy, and went his way, firmly clutching in his hand the palm of his little sister's hand. Kate remained standing on the road confused, wondering what the impertinent boy had just told her. Then she jerked her head and walked away. Did she regret her act that she had done so many years ago? Apparently not. To her, the banter was just a mistake. Too bad she didn't get to capitalize a little on that mistake. And a few days later, she was found at his mother's grave with a foam, drunk on some nasty stuff and dead. Andrew told his eldest son about it, because he realized that you should not hide anything from those you love, because the truth may hurt, but it also determines who is who. These days, Steph has already graduated from school and entered the Institute of International Relations. Steph misses his brother very much and always happily awaits his arrival home. Andrew and Julia are proud of all their children, but the eldest in particular. After all, this boy once managed to unite their hearts. Thanks to him, they realize that the outer shell is not so important. The main thing is that inside a person, if he lives with joy and love for his loved ones, then no life vicissitudes are not terrible for him. And one can cope with any misfortune, overcome everything, and come out a winner if loving people are around.